The survey team landed on a Tuesday, which I remember because Tuesdays are when I turn the alkaline channels and I had to stop halfway through to watch them set up. There were 6 of them: Kaluvith Survey Directorate, Outer Belt Assessment Division, smooth-shelled, the color of old pewter, with the kind of posture that comes from never having bent over a row in their lives. They had equipment cases I didn't recognize, and a drone array that spent 45 minutes mapping every building, every field line, every irrigation trunk, before any of them said a word to me. The lead surveyor was called something I couldn't pronounce, and didn't try. She held a data slate the way people hold data slates when they already know what it's going to say. She walked the perimeter of the main field, noted the hand-built diversion berms, noted the manual soil testing rig bolted to the fence post, noted me standing next to it, and made a mark. "This installation," she said, not looking up, "is classified as subsistence node, category null." I said, "All right." She looked up then. I think she expected something else. I didn't give her anything else. Category null meant no strategic value, no commercial value, no resource claim worth filing. It meant we weren't worth a follow-up visit. It meant that in the Kaluvith's Colonial Land Use Register, Yethros Khalid Station 7, 22 years of broken ground, 2 kilometers of hand-dug irrigation trunk, 4 generations of soil amendment data written in logbooks under my bunk, was the administrative equivalent of a rock. "The primary surveyor will note," she continued, making another mark, "that soil management methodology here is manual and non-standardized. Expertise classification, artisanal. No integration pathway with directorate systems." Artisanal, I wrote that down. I keep a small notebook in my breast pocket. Old habit, started the first year out here when I realized there was nothing in any database that matched what I was standing on. They were gone by mid-afternoon. I finished turning the alkaline channels and went to bed. The Kaluvith experimental grid was 3 kilometers east of us, on the leeward flat. They'd broken ground for it the same week they surveyed us. 240 hectares of high-yield protein cultivar under the management of something called the Directorate Agricultural Reasoning Engine, DARE for short. Fully automated, sensor-dense. The kind of system that produces a 14-point diagnostic report every 6 hours, and a quarterly yield projection down to the kilogram. I walked out there once, the week after they landed, to have a look. A Kaluvith junior technician showed me around. He was younger than the lead surveyor, and hadn't yet learned how to hold a data slate with that particular expression. He was actually proud of the system. He showed me the sensor array, the automated amendment dispensers, the real-time soil chemistry readout on the main terminal. I looked at the readout for a while. "What's your saline baseline?" I asked. He checked. 0.42. Well within tolerance. "And the alkalinity buffer, what's it running against the rainy season draw?" He had to look that one up. The answer, when it came, was a number that didn't match what I knew about this soil. Not by much, just enough. "Your eastern boundary," I said. "The flat below the secondary ridge. You've got a subsurface mineral seam running under that sector. Magnesium-calcium interface. Maybe 30 centimeters down. When the wet season pushes water up through it, the chemistry at root level shifts faster than a 6-hour diagnostic cycle can track." The technician nodded politely the way people nod when they are not writing anything down. "I'll note it," he said. He didn't note it. I wrote it in my notebook instead, and walked back to the alkaline channels. The rainy season started 6 weeks later, which out here means 3 days of hard ground soak, followed by 2 weeks of slow draw-up from below. By the end of the first week, the DARE system was running its 3rd diagnostic escalation. By the end of the second week, it had worked through 11 of its 17 alkaline collapse protocols and was beginning to loop. The automated amendment dispensers were running around the clock, which means they were adding compounds to a soil that didn't need more compounds. It needed different management entirely. The kind you can't automate because it changes every 30 meters depending on what's 30 centimeters under your feet, and nobody has ever mapped it, because nobody in any database has stood here long enough. I could see the grid from my fence line. The protein cultivar had gone pale at the tips. That particular pale that means the roots are finding chemistry they were never calibrated for. A field turning pale from the bottom up has a specific quality of wrongness that I recognized on day 11. DARE recognized it on day 14, which is when its diagnostic cycle started generating external consult requests. Those requests went to the nearest Kaluvith agricultural node, 4 days signal bounce away. The return recommendation, when it arrived, was calibrated for a different soil profile entirely. The system had pulled the closest planetary match from its database. A colony world, 2 systems over, similar surface chemistry, none of the subsurface variance that makes this flat what it is. The dispensers ran harder, the cultivar pale deepened to yellow at the edges. I watched from the fence line. I want to be clear, I didn't feel good about it. I felt tired, which is what 22 years of this soil does to a person. I also felt, in a specific and quiet way, correct. Those are different things, and it's worth knowing the difference. The garrison quartermaster showed up at my gate on day 16. His name was Torvek, a Kaluvith logistics officer, mid-rank, the kind of gray shell plating that meant he'd been out here long enough to develop corners. He came alone, which told me he hadn't been sent officially. He stood at the gate and looked at my field, which was the green it had always been, and then looked at the experimental grid in the distance, which was not. "Your ground doesn't look like theirs," he said. "No," I said. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "The protein supplement quota for the Eastern Colony sector runs through that grid." "I know. 3 garrison outposts are on that quota line." "I know that too." I had read the logistics bulletin. I read everything that crosses the settlement terminal, even the things not addressed to category null nodes. He looked at my field a while longer. "Can you fix what's happening over there?" "Yes." "What do you need?" "A reclassification," I said. "In writing, my installation, my expertise, my integration pathway. Filed with the directorate, not just noted on a slate." I paused. "And I'll need to see the original survey report filing code." I already had it in the notebook. I just wanted to know if he knew that I had it. He stared at me. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He nodded, once, slowly. The way people nod when they understand that the conversation they thought they were having is not the one actually happening. "I'll take it to the director," he said. "Thank you," I said. He left. I went back to weeding a row that didn't strictly need it yet. Orvith Salak, survey director, arrived on day 19. She came with 2 aides and no data slate, which told me someone had decided this was not a data slate kind of problem. She stood at my fence line in the early morning and looked at the experimental grid, yellow now in broad patches, the DARE dispensers still cycling uselessly, and then looked at me. "Soil tender?" she said. "Coordinator," I said. "Agricultural liaison, Yethros Khalid Station 7, 2 decades on this ground. We have a chemistry event in the experimental grid." "Yes." "The DARE system has been unable to produce an actionable recommendation." "Yes. We are requesting your assessment." I looked at the grid. I looked at my fence line. I took out the small notebook, opened it to the page with the filing code, and held it where she could see the handwriting. "I'd like the reclassification in writing first," I said. The aide on the left made a sound. The aide on the right looked at the aide on the left. Orvith Salak looked at me for a long moment. The particular quality of stillness that means something is being recalculated from a fairly deep level. "Write the order," she said to the aide on the right. It took 11 minutes. I watched the experimental grid while we waited. The dispensers were still running. I was already making a list in my head of what I'd need from the shed, what I'd do first, what sector I'd start in and why. The aide handed me the order. I read it through. All of it, every clause, folded it, and put it in the notebook next to the filing code. "All right," I said. "Here's what's happening." I walked them through it at the fence line. The subsurface seam, the magnesium-calcium interface 30 centimeters down. The way the wet season draw-up changes root zone chemistry faster than any 6-hour cycle can catch, because the seam doesn't run evenly. It dips and rises. It pools in the southeast corner. It thins out near the northwest edge, where the ridge drainage cuts under it. The way you find this out is by walking the ground, testing manually, writing it down, and then walking it again the following season, and adjusting what you wrote. The way you do that for 20 years, and the ground eventually stops surprising you. mostly. None of this was in any Kaluvith database. It was in 4 logbooks under my bunk, and in the notebook in my breast pocket, which were not integrated with any directorate system, and were classified as artisanal. I shut the dispensers off at noon. The DARE system protested, generated an alert classifying manual override as an unauthorized intervention in an active remediation sequence. I cleared the alert with the director's new authorization code, which took 40 seconds. Then I started in the southeast corner. The amendment sequence I ran wasn't complicated. It wasn't exotic. Everything I used had been in the shed for years. Compounds I'd mixed and adjusted and remixed for this specific ground, in concentrations I'd arrived at through the kind of iterative failure that doesn't generate a report, but does eventually generate knowledge. I worked sector by sector, 30 meters at a time, testing as I went with the manual rig on the fence post, the one the lead surveyor had noted and classified. By the end of day 2, the southeast corner had stopped getting worse. That's all I was aiming for, till day 2. Stop the deterioration. Let the soil stop fighting itself. Day 3, I moved northwest. Day 4. I caught the thin band along the ridge drainage that was doing something slightly different from the rest of the field, requiring a different ratio, which I knew about because it had done the same thing 14 years ago, during a wet season that ran long, and I had written it down. On day 4, the pail started to pull back from the tips. On day 6, the DARE system's diagnostic cycle dropped from red to amber for the first time in 3 weeks. One of the aides came by the fence line to tell me, as though I had not been watching the field every hour of every day since I'd started. "Good progress," he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at my logbooks, which I'd brought out to the fence post to cross-reference. 4 volumes, handwritten, the spines worn down to the board. He looked at them the way the junior technician had looked at the manual testing rig, with the expression of someone trying to locate a category that doesn't exist in their system. He didn't say anything else. I went back to the northwest sector. Orvith Salak returned on day 7. Same fence line, same early morning. The grid behind her was green again at the tips, not fully recovered, but recovering, which is a different thing, and the more important one. "The yield projection is recoverable," she said. "Yes," I said. "The DARE system is being updated with your amendment protocol." "Good. Make sure they note the seasonal variance on the ridge drainage band. It runs different from the rest of the field after a long wet season. It's in volume 3, if they need the reference data." She looked at the logbooks on the fence post. "We would like copies." "I'll have them transcribed." I paused. "I'll need the integration request filed through the new classification." "It will be filed," she said. She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, the dispensers on the experimental grid stood still for the first time in 3 weeks. "The original survey assessment," she said. "Category null. Expertise classification. Artisanal. No integration pathway." She stopped. "That assessment was in error." "It was," I said. "We do not have a file category," she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not quite embarrassment, closer to the tone of a person discovering a gap they should have known about, for the kind of knowledge that accumulates in someone who has worked the same ground for 20 years. I thought about the logbooks. I thought about the notebook in my breast pocket, the first entry in it from my 3rd week on this ground, when I'd noticed something about the southeast corner that didn't match anything in any database, and had written it down because it seemed like the kind of thing that would matter later. It had mattered later. It had taken 22 years, but here we were. "No," I said. "I expect you don't." She left. The aides left. The garrison supply line sent a brief acknowledgement that morning. Category Null Station 7 was being reclassified in the Colonial Resource Register and added to the Eastern Sector quota structure. I read it at the terminal, made a note in the notebook and filed it. Then I went back to the alkaline channels. It was a Tuesday.